Welcome to our Zoom lessons on the story of Jesus. My name is Jamie Knapp, and in this lesson, we will focus on base camp. Let's share the screen so we can get to the PowerPoint slides. Once Jesus' ministry officially begins, each of the synoptic gospels follows the same basic pattern. And it goes this way: the ministry in Galilee, the journey to Jerusalem, the final week, and the days after Jesus' resurrection. In terms of the ministry in Galilee, Matthew and Mark dedicate a significant portion of their gospel to describing what was taking place during that time. Matthew begins in chapter 4, verse 12, and goes all the way to chapter 18, verse 35, about half of the chapters in his gospel describing the ministry of Jesus during his time in Galilee. Mark starts in verse 14 of chapter 1 and goes through chapter 9, verse 50, a little more than half of the chapters. Luke provides information beginning in chapter 4, going through chapter 9, verse 50, but he doesn't provide quite as much detail as Matthew and Mark do. In terms of the journey to Jerusalem, Matthew only dedicates 2 of his 28 chapters to that time in Jesus' life. Mark only dedicates 1 of his 16 chapters, but this is where Luke chooses to focus his attention. He focuses 10 of the 24 chapters in his gospel on Jesus' final journey to Jerusalem. In terms of the final week of Jesus' life, each of the 3 synoptic gospels provides us with very important details about that time, and each dedicates about the same proportion of their gospel to the last 7 days of Jesus' life. And then each of these synoptic gospels provides us with 1 chapter focused on the days following the resurrection of Jesus. Well, in terms of base camp, most of Jesus' ministry occurred in Galilee. He did travel from time to time outside of Galilee into the areas where there were Gentiles living, occasionally through Samaria. And from time to time, he did go to Jerusalem as he would travel for one of the Jewish religious festivals, like the Feast of Unleavened Bread. But the idea that Jesus worked primarily out of Jerusalem is not accurate. Now, it's easy to think that because most of the important events in Christianity in terms of the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus happened in or right around Jerusalem during the final week of his life. And so those events are very, very important and they stand out to us. But if we really look into the Gospels, particularly the Synoptic Gospels, we're able to see that most of Jesus' 3-year ministry happened in Galilee. At this point, I'd like to share a different screen because we want to do a little bit of map work. And let's go to a map that we have seen previously. And this provides us with this kind of an overview of the provinces in and around Judea and all the way up to Galilee. Now, the important markers for us, here's the Sea of Galilee, and the squiggly line is the Jordan River, and here's the Dead Sea. Judea is a province here in the southern part or the lower part of the screen, with Jerusalem, Bethany, Bethlehem, Beersheba. Here's Samaria, and here's Galilee. And we're going to focus most of this lesson here in Galilee, and in particular, you can see the cursor moving right around this area where there's a red dot and it says Capernaum. Most of what I'm going to talk about now and what will be on the PowerPoint slides will have to do with this particular area. And then we'll come back and look at a more detailed map of this area in just a few minutes. So let's get back to the PowerPoint. Galilee itself is divided into 2 basic parts. There's Upper Galilee and there's Lower Galilee. Upper Galilee is hilly, it's very remote, and it is sparsely populated. When Jesus wanted to be alone, he would go into Upper Galilee. He would get back into the very remote, hilly part of Upper Galilee, and that's where he was able to have time alone, time to pray. Lower Galilee does have some hills, but it also has some valleys, and it is more densely populated. There are more people living in Lower Galilee, and particularly during the time of Jesus' ministry, there were more people living in Lower Galilee than in Upper Galilee. A key part of Galilee and that whole region was the Sea of Galilee. Now, if you look at John chapter 21, verse 1, you don't see anything about the Sea of Galilee. You see Lake Tiberias. Well, it's the same body of water. In Luke chapter 5, verse 1, reference is made to Lake Gennesaret. Well, that's the Sea of Galilee. There were just different ways to, different names for the Sea of Galilee. Sea of Galilee, 13 miles long, 8 miles wide. And just to provide a point of comparison, Lake Texoma is 30 miles long and 10 miles wide. Of course, Lake Texoma was formed with the building of a dam, and so it's not a round lake. It's not a lake that looks like a kidney. It's more of a lake that has a deeper channel, and then it kind of flooded back into various fingers into low-lying areas. And that's not really how the Sea of Galilee looks, but just so there's a way to compare the size of Lake Texoma and the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Galilee was noticeably smaller, and still is noticeably smaller than Lake Texoma. The Sea of Galilee is fed by the headwaters, or the early part of the Jordan River that actually comes down into the Sea of Galilee, and then it comes out the southern end of the Sea of Galilee and continues down to the Dead Sea. It's also fed by numerous underground springs, but many of those springs actually produce mineral water. They're geothermal, and that means that that kind of water isn't always conducive to fish and to fishing. However, the northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee has freshwater springs. And freshwater, very conducive to fish and to the fishing industry. And that's why during the time of Jesus, far more people lived around the northwest corner of the Sea of Galilee. And that's why there were so many people who engaged in fishing as their job, as their occupation. Now, the city of Capernaum was actually the base for Jesus' ministry. Within Galilee itself, Jesus visited Nazareth from time to time, but Nazareth was not where he based his ministry. And there's probably multiple reasons for that. But Capernaum was the base for his ministry, and it was a fishing village. It was on the north end of the Sea of Galilee, and it was approximately the same size as Nazareth, somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 people. But very importantly, there was a main highway running from north to south that passed through Capernaum, or at least very close to Capernaum. And so there was a lot of traffic coming in and out of Capernaum, and Nazareth wasn't on that highway. And so we might say Nazareth was off the beaten path. And so there were various reasons why Jesus would have selected Capernaum as his base rather than Nazareth, and we've tried to identify a couple of those. Scholars tell us that most of Jesus' ministry occurred in a triangle of three villages: Capernaum, Bethsaida, and Chorazin. And at this point, it would probably be helpful if we shared a different screen and looked at a more detailed map of Galilee. And I'll try to go back and touch on a few things that I've mentioned that were on the PowerPoint slides. And I realize this is a very busy map. And so I'm going to be moving the cursor around a little bit to show us various things. Here's the Mediterranean Sea. Here's the Sea of Galilee. We talked about Upper Galilee, hilly, more remote, and Lower Galilee. Still some hills, but also some valleys, which you can see. We talked about a highway that ran from north to south. Well, this red line represents that highway. You can see that Capernaum isn't technically right on the highway, but it's very, very close, and it continues along the way. Here's Nazareth, much farther removed from the highway than Capernaum itself. The Sea of Galilee, down in this area, where you'll notice there really weren't any villages or towns. That's because the water in this area would have been mineral water. But here in the northwest corner is where the freshwater springs were. So the Jordan River flowed through here, emptied into the Sea of Galilee, and then came out to the bottom side of the Sea of Galilee and continued south. But up in this area is where the freshwater springs were, which is why there were so many fishing villages. Archaeologists have uncovered approximately 20 different fishing villages and sites where they could tell that there was a fishing industry in this area. By the way, here's Gennesaret, which is why this would at times be called Lake Gennesaret. Here's Tiberias, which is why the Sea of Galilee also is known at various points as Lake Tiberias. And here's Capernaum. Here's Bethsaida, and there were actually a couple of different possible sites for Bethsaida, but over in this area. And here's Chorazin. And so scholars tell us that a lot of Jesus' ministry actually occurred here. And in fact, we can see that if we read in Matthew chapter 11, beginning in verse 20, which I'll do in just a moment. One other thing I want to point out about the Jordan River. It actually was the dividing point between Herod Antipas and his kingdom, which would have been to the west or the left of the Jordan River, and the territory that was ruled by his brother Philip, or the individual we called Philip number 2 in our lesson on Herod. In addition, everything to the left of the Jordan River was Jewish culture. Everything to the right of the Jordan River was Greek culture. And so Jesus would often kind of move back and forth across the Jordan River. And as he did, he was moving from one culture to another. He was also moving from a region controlled by one ruler to a region controlled by a different ruler. So let me get back to PowerPoint slides. And we'll share this screen. So a lot of the ministry, in fact, much of the ministry of Jesus happened in those three cities, but not everyone, the three villages, not everyone in the three villages responded affirmatively to what Jesus said. They didn't respond to his message. They didn't even respond to his miracles. And so in Matthew chapter 11, Jesus delivers the woe unto you passage, at least one of them, and he's aiming it at those three villages. So allow me to read, beginning in verse 20 of Matthew chapter 11. Then Jesus began to reproach the cities in which most of his miracles were done, because they did not repent. Woe to you, Chorazin! Woe to you, Bethsaida! For if the miracles had occurred in Tyre and Sidon, which occurred in you, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. Nevertheless, I say to you, it shall be more tolerable for Tyre and Sidon in the days of judgment than for you. And you, Capernaum, will not be exalted in heaven, will you? You shall descend to Hades. For if the miracles had occurred in Sodom, which occurred in you, it would have remained to this day. Nevertheless, I say to you that it shall be more tolerable for the land of Sodom in the day of judgment than for you. Well, that's our lesson on the base camp of Jesus. In our next lesson, we're going to focus on the followers of Jesus. I hope you can join us.